Incredible savings on hundreds of items throughout the store, Friday through Monday.
Ace is the place with the helpful hardware, folks.
We read care labels on thousands of white garments and were surprised they had this symbol, which means do not use chlorine bleach. OxyClean White Revive has 40% more whitening power without chlorine spills. OxyClean White Revive. Whiter white, guaranteed.
I've been making blades here at Gillette for 20 years. There's a lot of innovation that goes into making America's #1 shave. Precision machinery and high-quality materials from around the world. Nobody else even comes close. Now starting at $7.99. Gillette, the best a man can get.
COPD makes it hard to breathe. So to breathe better, I go with Anoro.
COPD tries to say go this way. I say I'll go my own way with Anoro.
Once Daily Anoro contains 2 medicines called bronchodilators that work together to significantly improve lung function all day and all night. Anoro is not for asthma. It contains a type of medicine that increases risk of death in people with asthma. The risk is unknown in COPD. Anoro won't replace rescue inhalers for sudden symptoms and should not be used more than once a day. Tell your doctor if you have a heart condition, high blood pressure, glaucoma, prostate, bladder, or urinary problems. These may worsen with Anoro. Call your doctor if you have worsened breathing, chest pain, mouth or tongue swelling, problems urinating, vision changes, or eye pain while taking Anoro.
Ask your doctor about Anoro.
Get your first prescription free at Anoro.com.
This is the era of digital possibility, when every connection is an opportunity to do more. To build a network of human progress, where enterprise, data, collaboration, and the cloud communicate and live. From IT leaders and business owners to educators and healthcare providers, there's a shared belief that technology brings opportunity. Where every fiber-lit building, enterprise, and city we connect lays the foundation to our digital economy and the groundwork for a new future. That's why we're committed to building the digital infrastructure that makes possibility achievable. Join us as we turn the promise of technology into digital progress. Together, Spectrum Enterprise
is on the rise in America. It's emboldened, normalized, and destroying lives.
When Dave got those tattoos, I just thought his life was over.
I've dedicated my life to pulling people out of hate. I know how these people think and how to help, because I used to be one of them.
Welcome back. I'm David Gura, continuing to cover the aftermath of the protest led by really just a couple of dozen white supremacists, white nationalists in Washington, D.C., covering the aftermath of that and the ongoing counter-protest in Washington, D.C. You're seeing a group gathered outside the White House near to Lafayette Plaza where that protest took place. Garrett Haake, my colleague who usually covers the Capitol for us, is there as all of this unfolds. And Garrett, what's the latest? What are you hearing from those who are standing sentry there right by the entrance to the old executive office building in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, David, look, the rally itself is over here, but the anger that it has unleashed is still rippling around Washington, D.C. right now. Surrounding this exit to Lafayette Park are no fewer than at least 3 that I can tell disparate counter-protest groups here who want different things. There's a communist revolution group chanting over my shoulder. There's the Antifa group with shields, helmets, and projectiles, apparently. They were throwing bottles a little while ago at the police, who appear to be spoiling for a fight here, rushing into the breach when we thought that this fence was opening and that those rally-goers might be coming out. There are Black Lives Matter protesters on the far side of them. So the counter-protest here, without a doubt, had essentially won the messaging day, right? This was an anti-hate, anti-racist effort here in the counter-protest scene. Now, with those who had brought that message into D.C. in the first place, apparently gone. I cannot confirm that they are gone, but I do not see them, and I don't, frankly, see any evidence that they would be coming this direction. The steps that MPD normally takes when they have to clear streets, bringing out things like horses and the like, we're not seeing that happen. That suggests to me that they are gone. What you have here left over is the lingering anger here, and the folks who came out to make a point that maybe goes a little bit beyond what this particular message was about today. And the hope, at least by police, by the city, is that this kind of crowd can be dispersed as nonviolently as they got here. But I can tell you, David, as I'm standing out here in the rain, most of these folks look like they're not going anywhere.
Garrett, very quickly here, your day began about 10, 12 miles west of where you are now, out in Vienna. You got on the metro with this small group of protesters that came to Washington, D.C., for the express purpose of spewing hate. And earlier in the day when I first spoke with you, you said it was evident to you this was not a well-oiled machine. It wasn't well-organized. It was not a sizable group. And looking again at the application that this group filed with the National Park Service, there was the expectation early on that there would be a group numbering in the hundreds. Help us just understand what exactly occurred in that plaza. Was what they were saying audible? Who turned up? You've already described how there are more journalists there sort of trying to cover what was happening than actual participants in that protest.
No, David, if the white supremacist group or the white nationalists who were putting this on wanted to send a message today, I couldn't honestly tell you what message they wanted to send. I can tell you the message that was sent, that they are disorganized, that they are functionally leaderless, and that they can't agree amongst themselves what message they want to present to the world. Jason Kessler is the person who got the permit for this event. He listed size of his event maybe between 100 and 400 people. He listed David Duke, the former leader of the KKK, as one of the speakers here. Well, 100 people didn't show up. 30 people didn't show up. David Duke did not show up. Neither did several of the other speakers who are supposed to be on that list. And while Kessler told me earlier in the day he sees his effort here as one about protecting the First Amendment and about protecting free speech and is not a racist message, several of the people who were in his group on that metro train told me that they felt that white people were the founding, I forget the exact word he used, founding race, founding culture of the United States, and that anyone who wasn't a white American was somehow less American. This is a wholly inconsistent message delivered by an incredibly divisive leader who doesn't appear to be speaking for the folks in his group. And to the question of what could be heard of their group, having circled this park a couple of times over the course of the day, I can tell you the answer to that question is nothing.
Access. Honestly, Susan, I don't know how.
I don't either. I think we're all trying to figure it out.
Helping us figure it out is Christian Picciolini, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Christian, I was talking with Garrett just a moment ago about this small 24 large group of protesters who showed up today, and we were talking about the lack of cohesiveness there. Help us understand the motivating factors. What are they?
Well, you know, what I saw today were several thousand counter-protesters and only a few dozen white nationalists. But I want to be clear that so many of the organizers from last year distanced themselves from this rally because their strategy is to go more mainstream. And what they saw happen last year actually hurt their numbers a little bit. So while Kessler had gone off and he'd done this rally and it underperformed, the rest of the leaders are going more underground. And what I think is more dangerous is somebody like Jason Kessler with a suit versus what I used to be 30 years ago, which you could see coming from a mile away. So even though they may have lost because they had less numbers, it was still a win for him because there were thousands of counter-protesters and hundreds of police officers who had to come out, and it still showed that they had a platform right on the front lawn of the White House.
You have you've debated with Jason Kessler. Let's take a listen, if we could, to that conversation, if you could call it that the two of you had.
Do you hold yourself accountable for the violence that happened there? I mean, you were the organizer of this rally.
Those protesters put themselves in a very dangerous, very risky situation because they were defying the state of emergency order.
But it was an alt-right person who came to that rally who ultimately drove his car into a group of people.
That's true, but he has not been found guilty, and I would say that there is a lot of reasonable doubt in that.
Christian, what can you tell us about Jason Kessler? As we were talking about at the top of the show, he sat down for an interview with NPR this week, an interview in which he ranked the races. NPR receiving a significant amount of blowback for airing that earlier this week. Who is he? As you say, he's the one who filed this application. He's the one who was the de facto organizer of what we saw today.
You know, David, 30 years ago, we had a strategy that would take it and make us undercover to mainstream. So we traded in our boots for suits, and Jason Kessler embodies this new strategy of leaderless resistance, or the lone wolf strategy, where they want to look like our neighbors, our doctors, our lawyers, our teachers, and in fact many of them are. And the whole idea is to make their message more palatable to appeal to the average white American racist. Because 30 years ago we recognized that our look was too edgy, so they've gone underground, they've mainstreamed, and I suspect we're not going to see the last of them.
Christian Picciolini, thank you very much for your perspective today. I really appreciate it. You can see more of Christian's story again tonight when MSNBC presents Breaking Hate at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And for more on the rise of right-wing nationalism, I want to bring in Vegas Tenold. He's a journalist and the author of the book Everything You Love Will Burn: Inside the Rebirth of White Nationalism in America. And Jane Coaston is a senior politics reporter for Vox. Michael Singleton with me as well. He's a Republican consultant. In Vegas, let me turn to you first. It struck me earlier today, we're talking about David Duke once again, somebody who had been part of the political currents some decades ago. He's back now. As Garrett said, he was on that application for this protest today. No indication that he showed up for it. Give us a sense, an overarching sense here of the status of this group. I keep using the word cohesive, but how organized is it? How big is it?
I mean, that's hard to say, but I think the fact that, we say that David Duke is back now, he never went away. And that's one of the problems with using the terms like the alt-right, which is the term they came up with, because it implies that what we're seeing today is something brand new and something different, whereas it isn't, and it's part of a continuum that's been going on for decades and generations in this country. And I think, like Christian said, the relative size of today's rally only indicates that no one likes Jason Kessler anymore. For the relative size of the movement itself, it's really hard to say.
Jane, I'll turn to you. Christian using the phrase boots to suits, and indeed when you looked at Jason Kessler arriving in Lafayette Plaza today, he was wearing a suit and tie as he stood there in front of that American flag, behind that American flag, the White House, where the President of the United States lives. How effective has that insidious transformation been for these groups?
Well, I think that it's something they discuss amongst themselves. There's a big concern among these groups about the issue of optics and whether or not they want to appear racist and anti-Semitic while being racist and anti-Semitic. And I think Kessler very much has attempted to really, strike a difference between himself and who he sees as the neo-Nazi and outright white supremacist groups. And I think in some ways that's been somewhat successful, but I want people to remember that, last year's Unite the Right rally began with a torchlit rally on UVA's campus in which people were wearing, polo shirts and khakis, and yet we're still chanting, Jews will not replace us. So no matter how much you change the look of the messenger, the message is still much the same.
Vegas, I want to ask you about the semantics involved here. The president of the University of Virginia presided over a memorial service today. He apologized for what happened last year, and he began to use terms that were not generic. He talked about anti-Semitism, he talked about racism, he didn't use this overarching term of alt-right. How important is it to call it like it is? Were you surprised in the aftermath of Charlottesville how that wasn't happening perhaps as much as it should have been?
I think it's tremendously important, and what we call them has significance. And when we call them alt-right, we give them the power to define themselves. We need to call it what it is. It's white supremacy, it's racism. When Richard Spencer says, I'm not a racist, I'm an identitarian, what does that mean? It means absolutely nothing. It means pretty much he's a white supremacist, and we need to be better at calling that out.
Michael Singleton, help us understand the perspective of the Republican Party here, bearing in mind the Republican Party itself is a big tent, and we're looking at the extreme right here, but we saw the president all but praising David Duke during the campaign, not rejecting what he said, not rejecting the groups here today, of course, and the tweet that he sent out, at least not explicitly. What are Republicans to do? What's your counsel to them as all of this continues to happen if we're in a position where the president is not going to do this explicitly?
Well, I mean, look, David, you have to ask yourself, why are so many of these individuals who belong to said groups feel welcomed and comfortable in the Republican Party? I mean, as a minority, I have been arguing and advocating for a very, very long time about the importance of the Republican Party outreaching and again, reaching out to communities of color, because the country is becoming diverse. It's important to have two competitive parties going after those votes. And as we have seen, the Republican Party hasn't done much of anything about it after the 2012 election with President Obama and Mitt Romney, whom I worked for. The RNC produced the Growth and Opportunity Project, and they went through this lengthy document talking about the importance of reaching out and spending money and going to those communities and listening and talking about the issues that impact those communities. And here we are several years later with the presidency of Donald Trump, and they essentially ripped that document to shreds and forgot all about it. And so, look, again, as I said before the break, I think the Republican Party is in a very tough position. And if they do not, meaning leadership, McConnell, Ryan, and others, if they do not speak out loudly against these things, despite Donald Trump,